The crystal wine glass shattered against the mahogany table as my mother's words cut through the silence like a blade through silk. "You're 28, Sophia, and what do you have to show for it? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. Your brother Marcus is saving lives in Afghanistan while you're playing dress-up with fabric scraps." The Thanksgiving dinner around us froze. My Aunt Linda's fork stopped midway to her mouth. My cousin Tyler's phone screen went dark in his hands. Even my grandmother's steady breathing seemed to pause. But it was the sound that came next that would change everything. The slow, deliberate scrape of my chair against the hardwood floor as I stood up, folded my napkin with surgeon-like precision, and said the words that would echo through our family for months to come. "You're right, Mom. I am nothing. But tomorrow, that changes." Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Sophia Chen, and I'm a fashion designer. Well, I was trying to be one. For 3 years, I'd been running a small boutique called Threads of Hope in downtown Portland, creating custom pieces for brides, prom queens, and the occasional theater production. My profit margins were thinner than the silk I worked with, and my bank account reflected that reality with brutal honesty. But I loved every stitch, every late night at the sewing machine, every moment when a client's face lit up seeing themselves transformed in my designs. My family saw it differently. To them, I was the disappointment sandwiched between my older sister Elena, a pediatric surgeon, and my younger brother Marcus, a decorated Army Ranger deployed overseas. Elena saved children's lives in the operating room. Marcus saved his fellow soldiers on foreign soil. And me? I saved prom disasters and wedding day meltdowns with emergency alterations and tissue paper flowers. The family dynamics had been strained for years, but never more so than during holiday gatherings. My mother, Catherine, had immigrant parents who'd built a successful restaurant chain from nothing. She measured success in concrete achievements, advanced degrees, and public recognition. Fashion design, to her, was frivolity, a hobby masquerading as a career, something you did until you found your real calling. That Thanksgiving dinner in November had started like all the others. The extended family gathered around the antique dining table that had been my grandmother's pride for 40 years. The china was spotless, the turkey perfectly golden, and the conversation predictably centered around accomplishments and achievements. Elena shared stories from the children's hospital. Uncle David bragged about his son's promotion at the law firm. My cousin Sarah announced her acceptance to medical school. Then came my mother's inevitable question, the one she asked at every gathering like clockwork. "So, Sophia, how's the little shop doing?" The emphasis on little always stung, but I'd learned to navigate these moments with practiced grace. I talked about my recent commission for the Portland Ballet's costume department, how I designed 30 tutus that would be worn by dancers performing for thousands of people. I mentioned the wedding dress I'd created for a military bride whose husband was deploying the day after their ceremony. But my mother's expression remained unchanged. The polite smile that never reached her eyes, the slight shake of her head as if my words were just noise filling the space between more important conversations. When I finished, she turned to my grandmother and launched into a detailed account of Marcus's recent medal ceremony, which she'd watched via video call from his base in Kandahar. That's when it happened, the moment that would reshape everything. My Aunt Linda, my mother's sister, made what she probably thought was a helpful suggestion. "You know, Sophia, my friend's daughter just got her real estate license. She's making 6 figures already. Maybe it's time to consider something more stable?" The table went quiet. Not the comfortable quiet of people enjoying good food, but the tense silence that precedes an explosion. I felt every eye on me, waiting for my response. I'd deflected these comments before, with humor, with grace, with endless patience. But something about that moment, maybe the wine, maybe the accumulation of years of subtle dismissals, broke something inside me. I set down my fork and looked directly at my mother. "What would it take?" I asked quietly. "What would I have to accomplish for you to be proud of me?" My mother's face flushed slightly. She wasn't used to direct confrontation, especially not in front of the extended family. "Sophia, that's not what this is about." Then what is it about? I pressed. Because every time we gather, every conversation somehow comes back to how Elena and Marcus are changing the world while I'm playing with fabric scraps. So I'm asking you directly, what would success look like if I were your daughter? The silence stretched like a taut wire. My grandmother reached for her water glass with shaking hands. My father cleared his throat but said nothing. And my mother? My mother, who had raised me to believe I could be anything, looked at me with something that might have been pity. Sophia, she said finally, her voice carrying the weight of disappointment accumulated over years. You're 28 years old. Your sister was chief resident by your age. Your brother has saved actual lives. You make pretty dresses for people who can afford pretty dresses. It's not that we're not proud, it's just— She paused, searching for words that would cut deep enough to matter. It's just that we always expected more from you. We thought you'd grow out of this phase and find something meaningful to do with your life. The words hung in the air like smoke from a snuffed candle. Pretty dresses for people who can afford pretty dresses. A phase? Something to grow out of. I felt the familiar burn in my chest, the one that came with tears I wouldn't let fall. Not here. Not in front of everyone. I stood up slowly, my chair scraping against the floor with deliberate precision. Every movement felt choreographed, as if I were performing the final scene of a play I'd been rehearsing my entire life. I folded my napkin into a perfect square and placed it beside my untouched plate. "You're right, Mom," I said, my voice steady despite the tremor in my hands. "I am nothing. I've spent 3 years creating art that makes people feel beautiful on the most important days of their lives. I've worked 18-hour days to meet impossible deadlines because someone's daughter deserves to feel perfect walking down the aisle. I've held crying brides and anxious teenagers and helped them see themselves as the goddesses they are. You're absolutely right. That's nothing." I reached into my purse and pulled out a business card, placing it next to my folded napkin. But tomorrow, that changes. Tomorrow, I'm going to show you exactly what nothing looks like when it finally decides to become something. The room remained frozen as I walked to the coat closet, retrieved my jacket, and headed for the door. I could hear whispered conversations starting behind me, the concerned murmurs of family members trying to process what had just happened. But I didn't turn around. I didn't offer explanations or apologies. I just walked out into the crisp November air and drove home to my tiny apartment above the shop. That night, I sat in my studio surrounded by half-finished designs and fabric samples, staring at my reflection in the full-length mirror I used for fittings. My mother's words echoed in my mind. Pretty dresses for people who can afford pretty dresses. As if beauty were a luxury only the wealthy deserved. As if making someone feel confident and radiant on their wedding day or prom night were somehow less valuable than other forms of service. I thought about the military bride whose dress I'd finished just weeks before. Her name was Jennifer, and her fiancé was deploying to Syria 3 days after their wedding. She'd come to me in tears because every other designer had told her they couldn't create something appropriate for a military ceremony on such short notice. I'd worked for 72 hours straight, hand-beating a bodice that would photograph beautifully under the harsh lights of the base chapel. When she tried on the finished dress, she cried, not from stress or anxiety, but from joy. She said she felt like herself for the first time in months. That was nothing to my family. Making a soldier's bride feel beautiful before her husband left for war was nothing. I pulled out my laptop and started typing. Not an angry email to my mother, not a defensive social media post about the value of creative work. I opened a new document and began outlining something I'd been considering for months but never had the courage to pursue. A plan that would either validate everything I'd been working toward or confirm my family's worst fears about my chosen path. The fashion industry was notoriously difficult to break into at the highest levels. Getting national attention required connections, capital, or extraordinary luck. I had none of those things. What I had was skill, determination, and now, thanks to my mother's words, the kind of burning motivation that turns impossible dreams into inevitable realities. I'd been following the career of a fashion blogger named Amanda Rodriguez for 2 years. She'd started with a small following, documenting her attempts to make it in New York's competitive fashion scene. Her content was raw, honest, and inspiring. She showed both the glamorous moments and the devastating failures. Her audience had grown to over 2 million followers across social media platforms, and she'd become a tastemaker whose opinions could launch or destroy emerging designers. More importantly, she'd been vocal about her desire to showcase designers who were creating fashion with purpose. Sustainable materials, inclusive sizing, pieces that told stories beyond their aesthetic appeal. Her most viral content series, called Fashion with Heart, had featured designers who were using their platforms to address social issues, support charitable causes, or honor underrepresented communities. I'd never reached out to her before, never felt like my work was significant enough to merit her attention. But sitting in my studio at 2 in the morning, my mother's dismissive words fresh in my memory, I realized I'd been thinking about significance all wrong. It wasn't about the scale of your impact or the prestige of your platform. It was about the intention behind your work and the courage to share it with the world. I began researching not just Amanda Rodriguez, but every major fashion influencer, blogger, and industry insider who might be interested in authentic stories about emerging designers. I made lists of fashion weeks in smaller cities, regional competitions, and online showcases that might provide stepping stones to larger platforms. But more than that, I started thinking differently about my existing work. The military bride's dress wasn't just a beautiful gown. It was a symbol of love persisting despite separation and uncertainty. The prom dress I'd created for Sarah Thompson, a teenager who'd been bullied for her size, wasn't just about making her look pretty. It was about giving her armor, confidence she could wear, a tangible reminder that she deserved to take up space and be seen. Every piece I'd created had a story. Every client had trusted me with their vulnerabilities and dreams. I'd been so focused on the technical aspects of design and the business challenges of running a boutique that I'd forgotten the emotional weight of what I was actually doing. My mother called it making pretty dresses for people who could afford pretty dresses. But what I was really doing was creating talismans, pieces of wearable confidence that helped people step into the best versions of themselves. That realization changed everything. Instead of defending my work as legitimate art, I needed to showcase it as meaningful service. Instead of arguing about profit margins and business sustainability, I needed to demonstrate the human impact of what I was creating. My family measured success in lives saved and problems solved. I needed to show them that fashion, at its best, was also about saving lives and solving problems, just different ones. Over the next 3 days, I worked with an intensity I'd never experienced before. I redesigned my entire portfolio, not just the clothes, but the way I presented them. Instead of focusing on technical details and aesthetic choices, I crafted narratives around each piece, the story of the client, the challenge they were facing, and how the garment I created helped them overcome that obstacle. The military bride's dress became a case study in honoring service and sacrifice while celebrating love. The prom dress for Sarah became an exploration of body positivity and inclusive design. A cocktail dress I'd made for a woman returning to the dating scene after divorce became a meditation on renewal and second chances. I reached out to every client I'd worked with over the past 3 years, asking if they'd be willing to share their experiences. Not testimonials about my craftsmanship, but stories about how wearing my designs had made them feel. The responses were overwhelming. Women wrote paragraphs about confidence gained and insecurities overcome. They shared photos from their special events, but more importantly, they shared emotions: joy, pride, transformation. By Sunday evening, I had assembled something unprecedented in my career. A comprehensive portfolio that positioned fashion design not as vanity or luxury, but as therapy, as empowerment, as a form of service that helped people navigate the most important moments of their lives with grace and confidence. That was when I made the decision that would change everything. Instead of sending my portfolio to Amanda Rodriguez or any other established influencer, I was going to create my own platform. I was going to document my journey from dismissed family disappointment to nationally recognized designer. I was going to prove that pretty dresses, for people who can afford them, could be the foundation for something much larger and more meaningful. I registered a domain name that Sunday night, threadsofpurpose.com. I set up social media accounts, not for my boutique, but for the mission I was about to embark upon. I wasn't just going to create beautiful clothes anymore. I was going to create beautiful clothes that told important stories. And I was going to document every step of that process, from conception to completion to the moment when my clients saw themselves transformed. But I needed something bigger than gradual social media growth and word-of-mouth marketing. I needed a moment that would capture national attention and prove, definitively, that what I was doing mattered. I needed something that would make my mother realize she'd been wrong about me, not in a small, personal way, but in a publicly undeniable way. That's when I remembered Marcus, my brother, the decorated Army Ranger, the family hero whose achievements my mother never tired of celebrating. Marcus, who was scheduled to return home for Christmas leave in just 3 weeks. Marcus, whose commanding officer was a woman I'd been following on social media for months without realizing the connection. General Patricia Williams was a pioneer, the first female general to command Marcus's unit, a woman who'd broken barriers throughout her career while maintaining her reputation as one of the military's most effective leaders. She was also, I discovered through careful research, a vocal advocate for veterans' mental health and military family support services. More relevant to my situation, General Williams had been featured in several fashion magazines over the past year, not for her military achievements, but for her advocacy of women supporting women in all industries. She'd spoken at conferences about the importance of recognizing diverse forms of service and contribution. She'd written op-eds about how society undervalues work traditionally associated with women. She was exactly the kind of person who might understand what I was trying to accomplish. But reaching out to a commanding general wasn't like messaging a fashion blogger. I needed credibility, a compelling reason for her to pay attention to my story. I needed to demonstrate that my work aligned with her values and mission in a way that would benefit both of us. That's when I had the idea that would either make my career or confirm my family's worst suspicions about my judgment. I was going to create something unprecedented, a collection of garments specifically designed for military families, pieces that honored their service while addressing their unique challenges, formal wear for military spouses attending ceremonies where their partners would be recognized, clothing that could be worn with pride at homecoming celebrations and deployment farewell dinners. But more than that, I was going to do something no fashion designer had ever done before. I was going to donate every single piece in the collection to military families who couldn't afford custom formal wear. I was going to create a program that ensured service members' families could attend important events dressed with the same dignity and pride that their loved ones wore their uniforms with. It was ambitious to the point of being ridiculous. I had less than 3 weeks to design, create, and launch an entire collection while also building the infrastructure for a national charitable program. I had limited capital, no established relationships with military organizations, and absolutely no guarantee that anyone would pay attention to what I was doing. But I also had something I'd never possessed before: clarity of purpose. For the first time in my career, I knew exactly why I was designing clothes and exactly who I was designing them for. My mother had dismissed my work as meaningless, but she was about to discover just how powerful meaningless could be when it was channeled with precision and passion. I spent Monday morning calling every military family support organization in Oregon, Washington, and California. I explained my vision and asked for their help identifying families who might benefit from custom formal wear. The responses were immediate and overwhelming. Within hours, I had a list of 30 families, each with their own story of service and sacrifice. There was Maria Santos, whose husband had been injured in an IED explosion and was receiving a Purple Heart at a ceremony in 2 weeks. She'd been wearing the same black dress to every military event for 3 years because they couldn't afford anything new. There was Patricia Kim, whose daughter was being recognized as Junior ROTC Cadet of the Year, but Patricia had never owned a formal dress that fit properly and made her feel confident enough to stand beside her accomplished child. Each story broke my heart and strengthened my resolve simultaneously. These weren't people who could afford pretty dresses. These were people whose sacrifices had earned them the right to feel beautiful and honored at the ceremonies celebrating their family's service. By Tuesday evening, I'd taken measurements, discussed preferences, and begun sketching designs for 12 different garments. Each piece was tailored not just to the woman's body, but to her story. Maria's dress incorporated subtle gold threading that echoed the military honors her husband would receive. Patricia's outfit included design elements inspired by her daughter's ROTC insignia. I worked 18-hour days, surviving on coffee and determination. My hands cramped from cutting fabric, and my back ached from hunching over the sewing machine. But every completed piece felt like a small victory. More than that, every text message from a client trying on her finished garment felt like validation that this work mattered in ways my family had never understood. But the real breakthrough came on Thursday when I received a call that would change the trajectory of everything I was building. Amanda Rodriguez, the fashion blogger I'd been following for 2 years, had somehow heard about my military family project. Not from me, I'd been too busy creating to do any marketing. From Maria Santos, who'd posted a photo of her finished dress on social media with a caption that had gone viral overnight. I've never felt so beautiful in my life. This designer created something that honors my husband's service while making me feel worthy of standing beside him at his medal ceremony. She's not just making dresses, she's giving military families dignity. Amanda wanted to feature my work in her Fashion with Heart series. She wanted to document the process, interview the families, and help me launch the charitable program on a national scale. She was offering me exactly the kind of platform I dreamed of, the exposure that could transform my local boutique into a nationally recognized brand. But she also wanted something I wasn't sure I was ready to give. She wanted the full story. Not just the inspiring narrative about serving military families, but the personal journey that had led me to this moment. She wanted to know about the family dinner, about my mother's dismissive words, about the pain that had catalyzed this entire project. Authentic storytelling requires vulnerability, she explained during our phone call. Your work is beautiful, but what makes it compelling is the emotional journey behind it. People need to understand not just what you're creating, but why you're creating it. That conversation forced me to confront something I'd been avoiding. This entire project had started as a response to my mother's criticism. I was designing clothes for military families partly because I believed in the cause, but also because I wanted to prove something to my family. I wanted to demonstrate that my work had value, that fashion design could be meaningful service, that I was capable of making a difference in the world. There was nothing wrong with mixed motivations, Amanda assured me. The best advocacy often came from personal experience with injustice or dismissal. The key was being honest about those motivations while staying focused on serving the people who would benefit from the work. I agreed to let her document the project, including my personal story. We scheduled the interview for the following Monday, which would give me time to complete the remaining garments and prepare for what I hoped would be a life-changing conversation. That weekend, I worked with an intensity that bordered on obsession. I finished Patricia Kim's outfit on Saturday evening, a navy blue dress with subtle military-inspired details that made her look like the proud mother of a distinguished cadet. I completed 3 more pieces on Sunday, each one representing hours of detailed handwork and careful consideration of the woman who would wear it. By Monday morning, I'd created 12 custom garments for military families, established partnerships with 3 veterans organizations, and developed a distribution system that could scale nationally if the response warranted expansion. More importantly, I'd transformed my understanding of what it meant to be a fashion designer. I wasn't just creating beautiful clothes. I was creating opportunities for people to present their best selves during their most important moments. Amanda arrived at my studio with a photographer and videographer ready to document both the finished pieces and my personal story. The interview lasted 3 hours and covered everything from my family's immigrant background to the specific techniques I used for creating inclusive, flattering designs for women of all body types. But the moment that would define everything came near the end of our conversation when she asked me about my family's reaction to this project. They don't know about it yet, I admitted. My mother thinks fashion design is frivolous. She's always compared my work unfavorably to my siblings' careers in medicine and military service. This project is partly my way of proving that creative work can be just as meaningful as those more traditional forms of service. Amanda's eyes lit up with the recognition of a story that would resonate deeply with her audience. What would you say to other women whose families don't understand or support their creative ambitions? I thought about that question for a long moment, considering not just my own experience, but the experiences of every artist, designer, and creative professional who'd ever been told their work didn't matter. The answer, when it came, surprised me with its simplicity and certainty. I'd tell them that the people who dismiss your work often do so because they don't understand its impact. They can't see the lives you're touching or the problems you're solving because they're looking for results that match their definition of importance. But impact comes in many forms. Making someone feel confident and beautiful might not save their physical life, but it might save their emotional life. It might give them the courage they need to pursue their dreams or overcome their insecurities. That's not frivolous work.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
That's essential work. And if your family can't see that, then find people who can. Build your own support system with people who understand the value of what you're creating. The interview wrapped up that afternoon, and Ananda promised the feature would be published within a week. She also connected me with several other fashion industry professionals who might be interested in supporting or expanding the military family program. But more than that, she left me with something I'd been missing my entire career: confidence in the value of my work that wasn't dependent on external validation. Yes, I wanted my family to be proud of me. Yes, I wanted to prove my mother wrong about fashion being meaningless, but I'd also discovered something much more important. I'd found work that aligned with my values and served people who needed what I could offer. That evening, I called Marcus for the first time in months. We'd exchanged occasional text messages, but our conversations had always been brief and surface level. He was busy saving the world, and I was busy making pretty dresses. What was there to talk about? But that night, I wanted to tell him about the project I'd been working on. Not to impress him or compete for family approval, but because I was genuinely excited about what I was creating and wanted to share that excitement with someone I loved. Marcus listened as I described the military family collection, the charitable program I was launching, and the media attention the project was receiving. When I finished, there was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Sophia," he said finally, his voice carrying an emotion I couldn't identify. "Do you have any idea how important this is? How much military families struggle with things like this?" He went on to tell me about fellow service members whose spouses had skipped award ceremonies because they didn't have appropriate formal wear. About families who'd gone into debt buying clothes for military events because they felt obligated to look worthy of their service members' achievements. About the psychological impact of feeling underdressed or inappropriately dressed at ceremonies meant to honor your family's sacrifices. "What you're doing," he said, "it's not about fashion. It's about dignity. It's about respect. It's about acknowledging that military families serve too, and they deserve to be honored for that service." That conversation changed something fundamental in my relationship with my work and with my family. For the first time, one of my siblings understood not just what I was doing, but why it mattered. Marcus didn't see my project as a hobby or a phase. He saw it as essential service to a community he cared deeply about. More importantly, he offered to help. His commanding officer, General Williams, would be visiting the base where Marcus was stationed in just a few days. If I was interested, he could arrange for her to see some of the work I'd been doing. Not as a favor to his sister, but as someone genuinely invested in supporting military families. I stayed up until 3 that morning preparing a presentation that would showcase not just the clothes I'd created, but the impact they'd had on the families who'd received them. Photos of Maria Santos beaming beside her medal-adorned husband, Patricia Kim standing proudly next to her ROTC daughter, both of them radiating confidence and joy. Testimonials from women who'd never felt beautiful in formal wear before, receiving custom pieces designed specifically for their bodies and stories. The next day, Marcus sent my presentation to General Williams. Within hours, I received an email that would change the trajectory of my career and my relationship with my family forever. "Miss Chen," the message read, "your brother has shared your remarkable work with our military family support team. We are deeply impressed by both the quality of your designs and the thoughtfulness of your approach to serving our community. I would like to discuss opportunities for collaboration and ways we might help expand your program to serve military families nationwide. Would you be available for a video call this Friday at 1400 hours? I read the email 3 times before the reality sank in. General Patricia Williams, the commanding officer my mother had heard about in countless stories from Marcus, wanted to discuss partnering with me. The woman whose achievements in breaking military barriers my family celebrated wanted to work with me on expanding my fashion program. This wasn't just professional validation, this was personal vindication on a scale I'd never imagined possible. But more than that, it was an opportunity to create something truly meaningful. If General Williams was interested in collaborating, I could potentially help military families across the country. I could turn my small Portland boutique into a national organization that addressed a real problem affecting thousands of service members and their loved ones. Friday's video call exceeded every expectation I'd allowed myself to have. General Williams was not only interested in my work, she was passionate about it. She'd experienced firsthand the challenges military spouses faced when trying to find appropriate formal wear for military events. She'd watched talented, accomplished women diminish themselves because they didn't feel properly dressed for ceremonies honoring their family's sacrifices. What you're doing, she told me, addresses a need that the military has never adequately acknowledged. We ask families to sacrifice alongside service members, but we don't always provide them with the support they need to feel valued and honored for those sacrifices. Your program does that. She offered resources I'd never dreamed of accessing: connections with military family support organizations nationwide, funding opportunities through veteran-focused charities and government programs. Most importantly, she offered her endorsement and support for scaling the program to serve military families across all branches of service. But what she said next was what I knew would change my relationship with my family forever. Miss Chen, I'm planning to visit your brother's unit next month for a medal ceremony. Several service members, including Sergeant Marcus Chen, are being recognized for their exemplary service. I'd like to invite you to attend that ceremony, not just as Sergeant Chen's sister, but as the founder of Threads of Purpose, a program that embodies the military values of service, honor, and taking care of our own. She paused, and I could see her considering her next words carefully. I'd also like to publicly recognize your work during the ceremony. What you're doing represents the best of military family support, and I want to ensure that recognition reaches as wide an audience as possible. Would you be comfortable with that level of visibility? I said yes before I'd fully processed what she was offering. Public recognition from a general at a military ceremony in front of Marcus's entire unit and their families. Not recognition for being Marcus's sister or Catherine's daughter, but recognition for my own work, my own achievements, my own contribution to military families. The ceremony was scheduled for 3 weeks away, just 2 days before Christmas, which meant it was happening during the same holiday gathering period when my mother would be hosting our extended family for her annual Christmas Eve dinner. The Christmas Eve dinner where she would undoubtedly ask about my little shop and make subtle comments about finding something more meaningful to do with my life. The Christmas Eve dinner where she would compare my achievements unfavorably to Marcus's latest commendations and Elena's recent publications. Except this year, Marcus wouldn't be there to accept those accolades in person. He'd be at his medal ceremony, where General Williams would be publicly praising my work in front of his commanding officers and fellow service members. I called Marcus that evening to tell him about my conversation with General Williams and to confirm I'd be attending his ceremony. Sophia, he said, his voice thick with an emotion I'd rarely heard from my stoic military brother. I'm so proud of you, not just for what you've accomplished, but for who you've become. You're going to change so many lives with this work. He paused, then added something that made my heart stop. Mom's going to lose her mind when she finds out what you've been doing, in the best possible way. I wasn't so sure about that. My mother had spent decades measuring success through traditional metrics: advanced degrees, prestigious careers, social recognition within established systems. What I'd created was important and impactful, but it existed outside the frameworks she understood and valued. But Marcus disagreed. Mom's always been proudest of work that serves other people. That's why she celebrates Elena's medical career and my military service. What you've done, creating a program that serves military families, that's exactly exactly the kind of meaningful work she's always wanted you to find. She just never understood that fashion could be a vehicle for that kind of service. Over the next 2 weeks, Amanda Rodriguez's feature story was published and went viral almost immediately. The combination of beautiful fashion photography, compelling personal stories from military families, and my own journey from family disappointment to national recognition resonated with millions of readers. The response was overwhelming. Fashion bloggers shared the story across their platforms. Military family support organizations reached out about partnerships. Most importantly, hundreds of military families contacted me requesting custom pieces for upcoming ceremonies and events. I was no longer just a small boutique owner making pretty dresses for people who could afford them. I was the founder of a national program that had been featured in major publications and endorsed by military leadership. In less than a month, I'd transformed from family disappointment to nationally recognized advocate for military families. But the moment that mattered most was still ahead of me. The medal ceremony where General Williams would publicly recognize my work in front of Marcus and his fellow service members just 2 days before our family's Christmas Eve dinner. The moment when my mother would finally understand that I hadn't been wasting 3 years making meaningless fashion. I'd been building the foundation for work that would serve military families for decades to come. The moment when she'd realized that her dismissive words at Thanksgiving dinner had catalyzed something far more significant than either of us could have imagined. The airplane descended through thick December clouds toward Joint Base Lewis McChord, carrying me toward a moment I'd dreamed about but never truly believed would happen. In my lap sat a leather portfolio containing letters from 37 military families whose lives had been touched by threads of purpose. Each letter was a testament to the power of feeling dignified and honored, written in the careful handwriting of spouses who'd finally felt worthy of standing beside their decorated partners at formal ceremonies. I'd barely slept in the 3 days leading up to this trip. The media attention following Amanda Rodriguez's feature had been relentless but incredible. CNN had picked up the story, featuring a segment about innovative approaches to military family support. Good Morning America had interviewed me via video call from my studio, with Maria Santos appearing alongside me to describe how her custom dress had transformed her experience at her husband's Purple Heart ceremony. But more than the media coverage, it was the personal messages that had kept me awake with excitement and nervous energy. Messages from military spouses across the country sharing their own stories of feeling underdressed, overlooked, or unworthy at ceremonies meant to honor their family's sacrifices. Messages from service members thanking me for giving their loved ones a reason to feel proud and beautiful. Messages from military children who'd seen their mothers stand taller and smile brighter while wearing pieces I'd created specifically for them. The program had grown beyond anything I'd imagined possible when I'd started sketching designs in my studio after that devastating Thanksgiving dinner. What began as 12 custom pieces for local military families had evolved into a national network of volunteer seamstresses, partner organizations, and corporate sponsors. We'd provided formal wear for over 200 military families in 6 weeks, with requests pouring in from every state and several overseas bases. General Williams had been instrumental in that expansion, not just through her initial endorsement, but through her ongoing advocacy within military leadership circles. She'd connected me with base commanders, family readiness group leaders, and military spouse organizations nationwide. More importantly, she'd helped me understand the deeper psychological impact of what we were doing. Military families, she explained, often struggled with their identity within the broader military community. Spouses and children make enormous sacrifices, but rarely receive recognition for those contributions. They attend ceremonies celebrating their service members' achievements while feeling like observers rather than participants in their family's military service. Custom formal wear created specifically to honor their role changed that dynamic fundamentally. When a military spouse wore a dress designed to reflect her family's service, when she carried herself with the confidence that came from knowing she looked appropriate and dignified, she wasn't just attending a ceremony, she was participating in it. She was claiming her place as an equal partner in her family's military journey. That understanding had shaped every aspect of how Threads of Purpose operated. We didn't just create beautiful clothes. We created pieces that told stories, that honored sacrifice, that acknowledged the unique challenges and contributions of military families. Each dress, each suit, each accessory was designed to help its wearer embody the pride and dignity that their service deserved. The plane touched down with a gentle thud that sent my stomach into nervous flips. In 6 hours, I would be sitting in the front row of a military ceremony where my brother would receive commendation for exceptional service in combat operations. In 6 hours, General Williams would publicly recognize Threads of Purpose as an exemplary model of military family support. In 6 hours, everything my mother had said about my work being meaningless would be proven devastatingly wrong in the most public way possible. Marcus met me at the airport, looking impossibly tall and confident in his dress uniform. I'd seen him in military attire before, but never in this context, never as someone whose commanding officer had specifically invited me to honor his achievements. For the first time, I truly understood what my mother meant when she talked about being proud of his service. He looked like someone who dedicated his life to protecting others, someone whose sacrifices had earned him the respect and recognition of his peers. But when he saw me walking toward him through the airport terminal, his face broke into a grin that was pure Big Brother, the same expression he'd worn when teaching me to ride a bicycle 20 years earlier. "Sophia!" He swept me into a hug that lifted my feet off the ground. "I can't believe you're here. I can't believe any of this is happening." During the drive to the base, he filled me in on details I hadn't heard during our phone conversations. The ceremony would include recognition for 12 service members from his unit, but Marcus was receiving the Bronze Star Medal, one of the highest honors for valor in combat. General Williams had specifically requested that family members attend, which was unusual for this type of ceremony, but reflected her commitment to acknowledging the role families played in military service. More relevant to my situation, the ceremony would be attended by military leadership from across the region, including several generals and their spouses. The media presence would be significant, with military journalists documenting the event for official publications and local news stations covering the recognition of hometown heroes. "General Williams really wants to make sure people understand what you've been doing," Marcus explained, as we passed through the base security checkpoint. "She's been talking about Threads of Purpose in meetings, using it as an example of innovative community support that addresses real needs. She thinks what you've created could be a model for other types of military family assistance programs." That afternoon, I met with General Williams in her office, a space that perfectly balanced military authority with personal warmth. The walls displayed her commendations and career achievements alongside family photos and artwork from military children. She greeted me not with the formal courtesy I'd expected, but with genuine enthusiasm and respect. "Miss Chen, I want you to know that your work has already had impact beyond what you might realize," she began, gesturing for me to sit in a comfortable chair across from her desk. "I've shared your approach with colleagues at other installations, and 3 bases have already expressed interest in establishing similar programs. You've identified and addressed a need that we should have been meeting all along." She explained that military leadership had been increasingly focused on family support and retention issues. Service member satisfaction and career longevity were directly connected to family stability and happiness. Programs that helped military families feel valued and supported weren't just charitable initiatives, they were strategic investments in military readiness and effectiveness. "What makes your program unique," she continued, "is that it addresses both practical and psychological needs simultaneously. You're providing families with appropriate formal wear, but you're also providing them with dignity, pride, and a sense of belonging within the military community. That combination is powerful and rare." General Williams then shared something that would stay with me long after the ceremony ended. She told me about her own experiences as a young military spouse, decades before she'd achieved her current rank and authority. How she'd struggled to feel appropriately dressed at formal military events, how she'd sometimes chosen not to attend rather than feel underdressed or out of place, how that sense of not belonging had affected her confidence and her relationship with the military community. "If a program like Threads of Purpose had existed when I was starting my military journey," she said, "it might have changed my entire experience, not just because of the clothes, but because someone would have been acknowledging that I mattered, that my presence at those events was important and valued." That conversation helped me understand something crucial about the impact we were having. We weren't just helping people look good at military ceremonies. We were helping them claim their place within the military community. We were validating their service and sacrifice by ensuring they felt worthy of participating in events that honored their family's contributions. The ceremony began at 1400 hours in the base chapel, a beautiful space that had hosted thousands of military events over the decades. The pews were filled with service members, their families, and military leadership from across the region.
The atmosphere was formal but warm, with an underlying current of pride and celebration that made the space feel electric. I sat in the front row with other family members of service members being recognized, wearing a navy blue dress I designed specifically for this moment. The fabric was silk with subtle gold threading that caught the light when I moved, creating an effect that was elegant without being flashy. The design incorporated elements inspired by military dress uniforms, clean lines, and purposeful details that honored the occasion while reflecting my personal style. Marcus looked incredible standing at attention with his fellow service members. The Bronze Star Medal ceremony was moving and powerful, with General Williams delivering remarks that highlighted not just individual achievements, but the broader values and commitments that defined military service. When she pinned the medal to Marcus's uniform, I felt tears burning my eyes despite my determination to maintain composure. But the moment that would change everything came after the individual recognitions were complete. General Williams approached the podium with notes I recognized as talking points we'd discussed during our meeting. Today, we honor service members whose courage and dedication exemplify the best of military values, she began. But military service is not an individual endeavor. Behind every decorated service member is a family that has shared in that service, that has made sacrifices and demonstrated commitment that deserves recognition and support. She paused, her eyes finding mine in the front row. Military families face unique challenges, including the challenge of participating appropriately in events that honor their loved one's service. Too often, financial constraints or lack of resources prevent family members from feeling appropriately dressed for formal military ceremonies. This problem affects families across all ranks and branches of service, and it represents a gap in our commitment to supporting those who support our service members. The chapel was completely silent now, with every person focused intently on her words. Recently, I had the privilege of learning about an innovative program that addresses this need with exceptional creativity and compassion. Threads of Purpose, founded by Miss Sophia Chen, provides custom formal wear to military families, ensuring that spouses and children can participate in military ceremonies with the dignity and pride their service deserves. My heart stopped. She was doing exactly what she'd promised, but hearing my name spoken with such authority and respect in this setting was overwhelming in ways I hadn't anticipated. Miss Chen's work represents the military values of service before self and excellence in all we do. She has created a program that not only addresses a practical need, but demonstrates profound understanding of the psychological and emotional challenges facing military families. General Williams gestured for me to stand, and somehow my legs supported me despite feeling like they'd turned to liquid. Miss Chen is here today not just as the sister of Bronze Star recipient Sergeant Marcus Chen, but as a community leader whose work exemplifies the best of civilian support for military families. Her program has already served hundreds of families and established partnerships with military installations nationwide.
The applause was immediate and sustained. I stood there, overwhelmed by the recognition and the realization that this moment was being witnessed by military leadership, local media, and everyone important in Marcus's professional life. More importantly, it was being documented by military journalists who would share this story throughout the military community. Programs like Threads of Purpose remind us that service takes many forms, General Williams continued as the applause quieted. Miss Chen's dedication to ensuring military families feel valued and supported is itself a form of service, one that strengthens our entire military community. When she asked me to join her at the podium to accept a certificate of appreciation on behalf of Threads of Purpose, I felt like I was floating rather than walking. The certificate was beautiful, but the words General Williams spoke as she presented it were what I would remember forever. Miss Chen, your work demonstrates that when we identify needs within our community and respond with creativity, compassion, and commitment, we can create change that extends far beyond our initial vision. Thank you for your service to military families and for showing us all what innovative community support looks like. The reception following the ceremony was a blur of congratulations, introductions, and conversations that would lead to opportunities I couldn't have imagined weeks earlier. Military spouses approached me with stories of their own struggles finding appropriate formal wear.
Base commanders asked about establishing Threads of Purpose programs at their installations. Military family support organization leaders wanted to discuss partnerships and expansion strategies. But the most meaningful moment came when Marcus found me near the end of the reception, still somewhat stunned by everything that had happened. "Sophia," he said, his voice thick with emotion I'd rarely seen from him. "Do you understand what just happened here? General Williams doesn't give recognition like that lightly. What she said about your work, about it being a form of service, that's not just polite ceremony talk. She meant every word." He paused, looking around the reception room where people were still discussing Threads of Purpose and its impact on military families. "Mom's going to see the photos from this ceremony. She's going to read the coverage in the military publications. She's going to understand that what you've built isn't just a fashion business. It's a program that military leadership considers essential for family support and community building." That evening, alone in my hotel room, I finally allowed myself to process what had happened. 6 weeks earlier, I'd been sitting in my studio after the worst family dinner of my life, feeling dismissed and undervalued by the people whose opinions mattered most to me. Today, I'd been publicly recognized by a general as a community leader whose work exemplified military values of service and excellence. The transformation wasn't just professional, it was personal. I no longer needed my mother's approval to feel proud of my work. I no longer needed external validation to know that what I was doing mattered. The letters from military families, the partnerships with military organizations, the expansion opportunities that were emerging daily, all of that was proof enough that Threads of Purpose was making a real difference in real lives. But I'd be lying if I said I wasn't excited about Christmas Eve dinner in 2 days. Not because I wanted to rub my success in anyone's face, but because I was finally ready to share something I was genuinely proud of with my family, something that aligned with their values of service and meaningful work, while still being authentically mine. The flight home the next morning felt different from any travel I'd ever experienced. I wasn't just returning to Portland as Sophia the disappointed daughter or Sophia the struggling boutique owner. I was returning as the founder of a nationally recognized program that had been endorsed by military leadership and featured in major media outlets. More importantly, I was returning with clarity about my purpose and confidence in my path forward. Whether my family understood and supported what I was doing or not, I knew I was exactly where I was supposed to be, doing exactly what I was meant to do. The media coverage began appearing within hours of the ceremony. Military publications featured photos of me receiving the certificate from General Williams, with detailed articles about Threads of Purpose and its impact on military family support. Local Portland news stations picked up the story, framing it as a hometown success story about a young entrepreneur who'd found an innovative way to serve military families. But the most significant coverage appeared in the military spouse networks and social media communities that had been following my work since Amanda Rodriguez's initial feature. Photos from the ceremony circulated widely, accompanied by detailed accounts of General Williams' remarks and explanations of how other military families could access Threads of Purpose services. By the time I landed in Portland, my phone was buzzing with notifications from interview requests, partnership inquiries, and messages from military families who'd seen the ceremony coverage and wanted to share their own stories. The program had reached a tipping point where growth was becoming organic and self-sustaining rather than something I had to actively promote. That evening, I received a text message that made my hands shake as I read it. From my mother, sent at 6:47 p.m. Just a link to one of the military publication articles about the ceremony, with no accompanying message. She'd seen the coverage, she knew what happened, and for the first time in our complicated relationship, she was at a loss for words. I stared at that text for 20 minutes before deciding not to respond. Not out of spite or anger, but because I wanted to save this conversation for Christmas Eve dinner. I wanted to look her in the eye when I told her about everything that had happened since that devastating Thanksgiving evening. I wanted her to see the woman I'd become when I'd stopped trying to earn her approval and started focusing on work that mattered to me. Christmas Eve dinner was still 2 days away, but I was no longer dreading it. I was anticipating it. Not because I thought it would repair our relationship overnight, but because I was finally ready to show my family who I really was and what I was truly capable of. The next day brought a surprise that would make Christmas Eve dinner even more meaningful than I'd anticipated. General Williams called personally to inform me that the military publication coverage had generated interest from the Pentagon. The Department of Defense was exploring ways to formally support programs like Threads of Purpose through existing military family assistance initiatives. "Miss Chen," she said, "I want you to understand the significance of this development. The military doesn't partner with civilian organizations lightly, but the response to your program has been so positive that senior leadership is actively looking for ways to expand and institutionalize this type of support." She explained that military family support programs were typically developed and implemented by military personnel or established organizations with long histories of service to the military community. For a civilian fashion designer to create something that military leadership wanted to adopt and scale was unprecedented. "What you've accomplished in 6 weeks would typically take established organizations years to achieve," she continued. "The combination of identifying an unmet need, developing an effective solution, and building sustainable systems for implementation is exactly the kind of innovation the military values most." That conversation crystallized something I'd been feeling but hadn't been able to articulate. The recognition I'd received wasn't just acknowledgement of good work or charitable intentions.
It was validation that I'd identified and solved a real problem affecting thousands of families in a way that aligned with military values and priorities. I'd proven that creative, innovative approaches to community support could be just as valuable as traditional forms of service. Christmas Eve morning, I stood in my studio surrounded by evidence of everything that had changed since Thanksgiving. Thank you letters from military families covered one entire wall. Partnership agreements with military family support organizations were stacked neatly on my desk. Media coverage featuring photos of me with General Williams was displayed alongside sketches for new designs inspired by different branches of military service. But the most meaningful items weren't the public recognition or professional achievements. They were the personal messages from individual family members whose lives had been touched by threads of purpose. The photo from Maria Santos showing her dancing at her husband's medal ceremony, radiating joy and confidence in her custom dress. The video message from Patricia Kim's daughter thanking me for making her mother feel beautiful enough to stand proudly during her ROTC recognition ceremony. Those personal connections were what had made everything else possible. The media attention, the military leadership recognition, the expansion opportunities, all of it had grown from the simple act of caring deeply about making individual people feel valued and dignified during important moments in their lives. As I got dressed for Christmas Eve dinner, I chose my outfit with the same care I put into designing pieces for my clients. A deep green dress that I'd created as parts of my holiday collection, with subtle detailing that referenced both traditional Chinese elements and contemporary American design. It was sophisticated without being flashy, confident without being aggressive, perfectly appropriate for a family dinner where I would be sharing news that would reshape how everyone saw me. I arrived at my parents' house carrying a leather portfolio similar to the one I'd taken to the military ceremony. This one contained printed copies of the major media coverage, letters from military families, partnership agreements with national organizations, and photos from the ceremony where General Williams had recognized my work. The house was filled with extended family, just as it had been during Thanksgiving dinner 7 weeks earlier. The same relatives who'd witnessed my mother's dismissive comments about my career were present for what I hoped would be a very different kind of conversation about my work and its impact. Dinner conversation followed familiar patterns. Elena shared updates about her latest research publication. Uncle David talked about his son's promotion to partner at his law firm. Cousin Sarah discussed her acceptance to a competitive medical residency program. The accomplishments were impressive and genuine, and I listened with sincere appreciation for my family members' achievements. But this time, when the conversation turned to me, I was ready with something different to share. "Sophia," my mother said, her voice carrying a tone I hadn't heard before, cautious, almost hesitant. "I saw some articles online about your work with military families. It looked like quite an event." The entire table went quiet. This wasn't the dismissive inquiry she'd made at Thanksgiving. This was genuine interest, perhaps even concern that she'd missed something important about her daughter's life and career.
I opened the leather portfolio and began sharing the story systematically, starting with the decision to focus on military families and ending with the Pentagon's interest in formally supporting programs like Threads of Purpose. I passed around photos from the ceremony, letters from grateful families, and copies of the major media coverage that had resulted from the military recognition. But more than the external validation, I shared the personal transformation that had occurred over the past 7 weeks. How shifting focus from profit to purpose had not only made my work more meaningful, but had also made it more successful in ways I'd never anticipated. How serving military families had connected me with a community that understood and valued the kind of service I was providing. When I finished, the silence around the table was profound but different from the uncomfortable quiet that had followed my mother's Thanksgiving comments. This was the silence of people processing information that fundamentally changed their understanding of something they thought they knew. My mother was the first to speak, her voice barely above a whisper. "Sophia, I had no idea. When I saw your name in those articles, when I saw you standing with that general, I didn't understand how you'd gotten from making dresses in Portland to being recognized by military leadership for community service." She paused, and I could see her struggling with emotions she wasn't accustomed to expressing. "I owe you an apology. Not just for what I said at Thanksgiving, but for years of not understanding what you were actually doing. I thought fashion was just about making pretty things for people who could afford pretty things. I didn't realize it could be about dignity, about service, about making people feel valued during the most important moments of their lives." The conversation that followed was unlike any discussion our family had ever had about my work. Instead of defending or explaining, I was sharing. Instead of minimizing my achievements to make others comfortable, I was honestly describing the impact Threads of Purpose was having on military families nationwide. My father, who'd remained mostly silent during years of family tensions about my career choices, asked thoughtful questions about the business model and scalability challenges. Elena, my surgeon sister, wanted to understand the psychological impact of feeling appropriately dressed during formal events. Even Uncle David, who'd suggested I consider real estate just 7 weeks earlier, was interested in the legal and organizational structures needed to support a rapidly growing nonprofit program. But it was my grandmother who provided the perspective that meant the most to me. She'd been listening quietly throughout my presentation, occasionally nodding as I described the letters from grateful families or the recognition from military leadership. "Sophia," she said finally, her accented English carrying the wisdom of someone who'd spent decades building something meaningful from nothing. "Your grandfather and I came to this country with nothing but the clothes we wore and the determination to build something better for our children. We started with one small restaurant because we knew we could make food that would nourish people and bring families together." She reached across the table to touch my hand, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "What you have built is the same thing we built, not a business, but a way of serving people during moments when they need care and support. The military families you help, they are like the customers who came to our restaurant not just for food, but for comfort, for celebration, for community. You understand what we understood. That when you serve people's deepest needs with love and skill, you create something much more important than profit." That comparison, linking my work to my grandparents' immigrant success story, reframed everything for my mother in a way that pure professional achievement never could have. She'd grown up hearing stories about how her parents had built their restaurant chain by focusing on service and community rather than just business success. Connecting Threads of Purpose to that family legacy made my work meaningful within the context of values she'd been raised to respect. The evening ended with my mother asking if she could help with the program expansion, offering her business experience with multi-location operations and her connections within the local community. It wasn't just an offer of support, it was an acknowledgement that what I'd built was substantial enough to benefit from her expertise and assistance. More importantly, it was her way of saying she finally understood that I hadn't been wasting 3 years making pretty dresses for wealthy clients. I'd been developing the skills, relationships, and reputation that had enabled me to create something meaningful when the opportunity presented itself. As I drove home that night, I thought about the journey from that devastating Thanksgiving dinner to this Christmas Eve celebration. 7 weeks earlier, I'd felt dismissed and undervalued by the people whose opinions mattered most to me.
Tonight, those same people had listened with genuine interest and respect as I shared achievements that aligned with our family's deepest values of service and community support. The transformation hadn't required me to become someone different or to abandon my passion for fashion design. It had required me to find ways to use my existing skills and interests in service of something larger than my own creative satisfaction. It had required me to connect my personal talents with community needs in ways that created value for other people while still being authentically meaningful to me. But most importantly, it had required me to stop seeking validation from people who didn't understand what I was trying to accomplish and start building relationships with people who shared my values and supported my goals. The recognition from my family was wonderful, but it was no longer necessary for my sense of self-worth or professional confidence. Threads of purpose had grown beyond anything I'd imagined possible when I first started sketching designs from military families in my studio after Thanksgiving dinner. But more than the external success, the program had given me something I'd been searching for my entire career: a clear sense of purpose that aligned my personal talents with meaningful service to others. That clarity would guide everything that came next, from the Pentagon partnerships to the national expansion opportunities to the hundreds of military families still waiting for custom pieces that would help them feel dignified and valued during their most important moments. I was no longer just a fashion designer trying to prove herself to her family. I was someone who'd found her calling and was ready to pursue it with everything she had. 6 months after that Christmas Eve dinner, I stood in the East Wing of the White House, adjusting the collar of a jacket I'd designed specifically for this moment. The fabric was midnight blue with subtle silver threading, professional yet distinctive, commanding respect while honoring the occasion. Around me, military families from across the nation filled the elegant reception room, each person wearing custom pieces created by the network of designers and seamstresses that Threads of Purpose had grown to encompass. The First Lady had requested this event after reading about our program in a military family magazine. She wanted to highlight innovative approaches to supporting service members and their families, and Threads of Purpose had become a national model for community-driven military family assistance. What started as 12 dresses for local Portland families had evolved into a program serving over 3,000 military families across all 50 states and 14 overseas installations. But the most meaningful presence at this White House reception wasn't the political leadership or media representatives. It was my family, sitting in the front row of the audience section, wearing expressions of pride and amazement that I would have thought impossible 7 months earlier. My mother had flown in from Portland, taking time off from her restaurant management responsibilities to witness her daughter being honored at the highest levels of government recognition. The ceremony began with remarks from the First Lady about the importance of supporting military families through innovative community partnerships. She spoke about the unique challenges facing service member spouses and children and the need for creative solutions that addressed both practical needs and emotional support requirements. Military families sacrifice alongside their service members, she said, her voice carrying the authority that came from years of public service advocacy. They deserve communities that recognize those sacrifices and respond with programs that honor their contributions while meeting their real needs. When she introduced me as the founder of Threads of Purpose, the applause was sustained and genuine. But what moved me most was seeing my mother's face in the audience, tears streaming down her cheeks as she watched her daughter being recognized for work that she now understood represented the deepest values she'd tried to instill in all her children. My remarks that day focused not on my personal journey from family disappointment to national recognition, but on the military families whose stories had shaped and inspired every aspect of our program. I talked about Maria Santos, whose confidence at her husband's Purple Heart ceremony had been captured in photographs that now appeared in military family support materials nationwide. I described Patricia Kim, whose pride while standing beside her accomplished daughter had demonstrated the transformative power of feeling appropriately honored during important family moments. But I also shared something deeper about what I'd learned through this work: that service takes countless forms, and meaningful contribution isn't defined by traditional career paths or conventional measures of success. The military families we served understood this intuitively because their own service often went unrecognized despite being essential to military readiness and effectiveness. Every military spouse who maintains their family's stability during deployments is serving their country, I said.
Every military child who changes schools multiple times and adapts to new communities is contributing to their family service mission. These contributions deserve recognition, and they deserve support that helps families feel valued and honored for what they give. The reception following the ceremony was filled with conversations that would lead to partnerships, funding opportunities, and expansion possibilities that would carry threads of purpose into its next phase of growth. But the moment that mattered most to me personally came when my mother approached me near the end of the event. "Sophia," she said, her voice thick with emotions she'd never been comfortable expressing, "I need to tell you something I should have said months ago. When I saw you at that Thanksgiving dinner, when I said those things about your work being meaningless, I was scared. I was scared that you were wasting your talents on something that wouldn't provide security or recognition or the kind of success I wanted for you." She paused, looking around the White House reception room where military families were celebrating their recognition and support. "I didn't understand that success could look like this. I didn't understand that using your creative gifts to serve others could become something so important that the White House would want to honor it. I was measuring your achievements against standards that didn't account for the kind of impact you were actually making." That conversation marked a fundamental shift in our family relationships, but it also represented something larger about societal attitudes toward creative work and non-traditional career paths. My mother's initial dismissal of fashion design as frivolous wasn't unique or unusual. It reflected broader cultural biases that valued certain types of work while underestimating others, that measured success through narrow metrics while missing the diverse ways people could contribute meaningfully to their communities. The months that followed the White House recognition brought opportunities that exceeded every dream I'd allowed myself to have as a struggling boutique owner. Major fashion magazines featured threads of purpose as an example of purpose-driven design. Business schools invited me to speak about building sustainable social enterprises. Military leadership from other countries reached out about adapting our model for their own family support systems. But the most significant development came through my ongoing partnership with General Williams, who had been promoted to Pentagon leadership partly based on her innovative approaches to military family support programs. She invited me to join a Department of Defense task force developing comprehensive strategies for military family assistance, bringing civilian expertise to complement military perspectives on family readiness and retention issues. That role represented something unprecedented in my career and my relationship with my family's expectations. I wasn't just running a successful nonprofit anymore. I was serving as an official advisor to military leadership on policies that would affect hundreds of thousands of families. The work my mother had dismissed as making pretty dresses for wealthy clients had evolved into national security consultation on military family stability and readiness. The task force meetings were held in Pentagon conference rooms, where generals and policymakers discussed strategies that would shape military family support for decades to come. In those settings, my fashion design background wasn't seen as irrelevant or frivolous. It was valued as expertise in understanding how people's external presentation affected their internal confidence and sense of belonging within communities. Military families we'd discovered through extensive research were significantly more likely to remain connected to military communities and supportive of continued service when they felt appropriately honored during important family moments. Custom formal wear that honored their role and sacrifices was one important component of that integration, but it represented a broader principle about acknowledging and supporting non-uniformed military family members. My recommendations to the task force focused on expanding this principle beyond formal wear to include other aspects of military family support. Professional development opportunities for military spouses that honored their unique skills and experiences. Educational programs for military children that acknowledged the valuable perspectives they'd gained through military family life. Recognition ceremonies specifically designed to honor family member contributions rather than treating them as appendages to service member achievements. These policy discussions represented the ultimate validation of everything I'd been working toward, not just professionally, but personally. The creative skills my family had initially seen as impractical were now being used to influence national policy affecting hundreds of thousands of people. The attention to detail and emotional intelligence required for fashion design were exactly the qualities needed to understand and address complex military family support challenges. A year after that devastating Thanksgiving dinner, I received an invitation that would complete my transformation from family disappointment to national recognition in the most symbolic way possible. Marcus was being promoted to Sergeant Major, the highest enlisted rank in the Army, and the promotion ceremony was being held at Arlington National Cemetery with full military honors.
General Williams, now serving as Deputy Chief of Staff for Personnel, would be conducting the ceremony. Military leadership from across the services would be attending to honor Marcus's exceptional career and his contributions to military family support advocacy. The event would be covered by national media as part of a larger story about military family programs and their impact on service member retention and effectiveness. But what made this ceremony personally meaningful wasn't the prestige or media attention, it was the request Marcus made when he called to invite me to attend. He wanted me to design and create the outfit his wife would wear to the ceremony, not as a favor to family, but as recognition that Threads of Purpose had become the premier source for formal wear that honored military family service with appropriate dignity and style. More significantly, he wanted me to speak at the reception following the ceremony, sharing insights about military family support that I'd gained through my work with thousands of families nationwide. My role wouldn't be supporting family member or proud sister, but recognized expert whose perspectives were valued by military leadership and policymakers. The ceremony itself was profoundly moving, with Marcus receiving recognition for career achievements that had genuinely made military communities safer and more effective. But the moment that brought tears to my eyes was when General Williams mentioned Threads of Purpose during her remarks about comprehensive approaches to military family support. Sergeant Major Chen's commitment to excellence extends beyond his individual service to his advocacy for programs that support military families comprehensively, she said, looking directly at me in the audience. His collaboration with his sister Sophia Chen's Threads of Purpose program demonstrates the kind of innovative partnership between military leadership and civilian expertise that creates lasting positive change for our entire military community. That public acknowledgement, delivered in front of military leadership and national media at Arlington National Cemetery, represented the complete transformation of how my family and the broader community understood my work and its significance. I wasn't just Marcus's sister anymore. I was a recognized partner in military family support whose expertise was valued at the highest levels of military leadership. The reception speech I delivered that afternoon focused on lessons learned from working with military families across diverse circumstances and challenges. But I concluded with something personal that connected my individual journey to broader themes about pursuing meaningful work despite initial lack of understanding or support. 18 months ago, I was a struggling fashion designer whose family worried that I was wasting my talents on work that didn't matter, I said, looking out at an audience that included Pentagon leadership, military families, and my own relatives who had traveled from across the country to attend Marcus's promotion ceremony. What I've learned through this journey is that meaningful work often looks different from what we expect or what others initially understand. The key is staying focused on serving others while remaining true to your own talents and passions. When you find ways to use your unique gifts in service of something larger than yourself, recognition and success follow naturally, but more importantly, you discover work that feeds your soul while making a real difference in the world. As I looked out at that audience, I could see my mother in the front row, wearing a dress I'd designed specifically for her, tears streaming down her face as she listened to her daughter speaking with authority and expertise about national policy issues. The woman who had worried that I was wasting my life making pretty dresses was watching me advise military leadership on programs that would affect hundreds of thousands of families. That evening, at the family dinner following Marcus's ceremony, the conversation was unlike any we'd ever had. Instead of my siblings sharing their achievements while I deflected questions about my struggling boutique, we were discussing collaborative opportunities. Alina wanted to explore connections between her pediatric medical work and military health support programs. Marcus was interested in expanding Threads of Purpose services to include family members of wounded veterans who faced unique challenges attending recognition ceremonies. My mother, who had spent years wondering when I would find meaningful work, was now asking detailed questions about the Pentagon Task Force and my recommendations for expanding military family support programs nationwide. She wasn't just being polite or supportive, she was genuinely interested in understanding work that she now recognized as significant and impactful. But the moment that meant the most came when she pulled me aside as the family gathering was ending.
"Sophia," she said, taking both of my hands in hers, "I want you to know that I've never been prouder of any of my children than I am of you right now, not because of the recognition or the success, but because of who you've become through this work. You've found a way to use your gifts that serves others while staying true to yourself, and you've built something that will help families for generations to come." She paused, and I could see her struggling with words that didn't come easily to someone who had always expressed love through worry rather than praise. "You were right to keep pursuing your passion, even when I didn't understand it. You were right to believe that creative work could be meaningful service. You were right to trust yourself when others, including me, suggested you should find something different to do with your life." That acknowledgement represented more than personal family reconciliation. It represented recognition that success and meaningful contribution could take forms that didn't fit traditional expectations or conventional career paths. My mother had learned what I had discovered through building threads of purpose: that when you find ways to use your unique talents in service of others' genuine needs, you create value that extends far beyond profit or prestige. Today, 3 years after that Thanksgiving dinner that changed everything, Threads of Purpose serves over 15,000 military families annually through a network of volunteer designers, partner organizations, and corporate sponsors. The program has been replicated internationally and has become a model for community-driven approaches to military family support that are now being adapted for other populations facing similar challenges. But more than the organizational success or policy influence, what I'm most proud of is the transformation I see in the lives of individual families who have been served by our program. Military spouses who stand taller at recognition ceremonies because they feel appropriately honored for their sacrifices. Military children who confidently participate in formal events because their family service has been acknowledged through their attire. Service members who can focus on their duties knowing their families feel valued and supported by their communities. These individual moments of dignity and recognition were what my mother had initially dismissed as meaningless when she criticized my work at that family dinner. They were also what had made everything else possible, from media recognition to Pentagon partnerships to White House honors. The journey from family disappointment to national recognition taught me something essential about pursuing work that aligns with your values while serving others' genuine needs. External validation and success are wonderful when they come, but they're not the primary purpose. The primary purpose is finding ways to use your unique gifts in service of something larger than yourself, something that makes the world better in ways that matter to you personally. My family dinner conversation had been devastating because it challenged me to defend work that I wasn't entirely sure was meaningful myself. The transformation came not from proving my critics wrong, but from discovering work that I knew was meaningful regardless of others' opinions. Once I found that clarity and confidence, recognition from others became a natural result rather than the desperate goal it had been before. For anyone facing similar questions about unconventional career choices or creative work that others don't understand, my advice is simple. Focus on finding ways to serve others using your authentic gifts, document and share the impact of that service, and trust that recognition will follow when you're creating genuine value for people who need what you can offer. The approval of others is wonderful, but it's not required for meaningful work or personal fulfillment. The military families I serve through Threads of Purpose understand this intuitively because their own contributions often go unrecognized despite being essential. They've taught me that service takes countless forms, and the most important recognition comes from knowing that your work makes a difference in lives that matter to you. Everything else, from family approval to national honors, is simply a bonus that makes the journey more enjoyable while you continue doing work that feeds your soul and serves your community. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.